the proceedings this evening are going to be hosted and chaired and conducted by Richard Williams, who will be introducing the other panel members. If you look at Richard's entrance on Wikipedia, I know you can't believe everything you read on Wikipedia, but you look at that and you think, ooh, that's not bad. Ooh, I wouldn't have minded doing that. Because he's got a very enviable history of working in both music and sport. And so it's perfect for our project, and we're grateful to him for being here this evening. And I'm sure he's got lots of stories to tell, but his main role is to draw little gems out of our panel. So on the left there we have John Waitman from East Street Arts. Then we have Doug Sandel, who was the instigator of the Fields of Vision initiative, and then Anthony Plavane, who many of you will know through his writings, even if you haven't been along specifically to see plays. A group of us went from here down to the West Yorkshire Playhouse to see his play about Eddie Waring. I have to say that we were more seduced by the strapline of a player pint for a tenner than a man by the name of Anthony Plavane. But as it turned out, it was really good.
Don't be surprised.
And he's written 3 books and all. Anyway, I'll hand over to Richard, and then I'll just do a bit of wrapping up. Oh, I should say there's no fire drills here planned, so if you hear the fire alarm go off, run like hell and get out of the building, okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I'll just say a little bit more about the members of the jury. John Waitman, far left, was a co-founder in 1993, I think, of East Street Arts, which first came into being at an old mill in Leeds, and then I think in 2000 you took over a boxing gym, or had been used as a boxing gym, is that right? And you have studios where people work, and it's a sort of a centre for people to pursue their practices and cooperate and so on. And you are part of a project with a French organisation called L'Octos, based in Lille in northern France. Next to you, Doug Sandel, known to many people here, no doubt. Poet, author, Manxman, taught for many years here at Leeds Beckett. And, as Jonathan said, is the instigator of this project, Field of Vision. And I'll ask him about that in a moment. And then Anthony, Jonathan has already said, journalist, playwright, author of 3 fantastic books, highly recommended. Promised Land, about Leeds United, and a very good book called, well, they're all good books, but Does Your Rabbi Know You're Here?, about the Jewish contribution to football in England. And then your third book, which is here and is also good because I've read it, A Yorkshire Tragedy, about Bradford City and various other aspects of Leeds sport, Yorkshire sport and its discontents and contents. Anthony worked for many years at the Sunday Mirror as its chief sports writer, now writes for The Guardian and the New European and other publications. So, Doug, let's start with you, and let's start with Fields of Vision, what it is, how it came about, and we'll talk a little bit about where it's going later, but if you could just set the scene for Fields of Vision.
Yeah, Richard, I'm going to start by actually quoting a little letter that I found in The Guardian in July last year, which I'd lost, but I found it luckily for today. And it was, someone wrote in the letters page and said, I was entertained when checking the programmes listed in the guide, that's the Guardian Radio and Television Guide, for 18th of July, BBC4 has What Do Artists Do All Day? This was a question. Followed by another programme called Swim the Channel. Now, it just so happens that one of the artists on our steering group of Fields of Vision, not only is she an artist and indeed head of the Department of Art design and architecture at Leeds Beckett. I nearly said Leeds Met, Leeds Beckett. But she's also a practicing artist, and that's Lisa. So we do have a connection between artists. What do artists do? Well, they do sport. Right. I forgot the question now. So, how did it all happen? Yes. Okay. Well, as a child, I'll go right back to when I was a young teenager. In my bedroom, there were photographs from magazines of sports people. And there were also cards and photographs of works of art. I was kind of interested in art because my older brother is an artist, and we shared a room at one stage, and the smell of kind of oil, linseed oil, still takes me back to those days. And I got very interested in art and the arts through I think, his influence. And I was also interested in sport. And so it wasn't a contradiction for me to have pin-ups of, from sports magazines and from art. So that was the kind of interest I had in those days. And I did do a bit of running. It wasn't too bad in my time. I ran for the Isle of Man. I also ran for Lancashire Schools Athletic Association, which we were affiliated to, and ran for the University of Leeds. And I've always run until very recently. And so I was interested, and I was also kind of interested academically in a sense, when many years ago, in 1972, I was asked to give a lecture on psychology and sport, particularly the psychology that I was interested in, which was visual perception and how we respond to things that we see and sensory perception. And I gave a talk which in 1972 at the PE department at Leeds University. And from it, a book came out of it called Psychological Aspects of Sport and Physical Education. And I think it was one of the first publications on sports psychology. And I had this strange chapter in it called Psychoaesthetic Aspects of Human Movement. So I was kind of interested in the aesthetics of human movement and how movement and aesthetics contributed to sport. So I did that and went down fairly well. And then I didn't do anything then until 1996, when I had a kind of, I think 1996, 1998-ish, when I had an idea, as I was on a committee of Leeds City Council, part of the Leeds initiative called the Leeds Cultural Planning Initiative, or what a Cultural Policy Committee, which was made up of various people from Leeds Valley. And Leeds Rhinos was having a fantastic time. They did one World Rugby League, the World Rugby League Challenge, as well as the English Championship. And Gary Heatherton was there. He was on the panel, and he got up and he said, I'd be very interested to know, he says, what is Leeds going to do? How can we celebrate this fantastic success of the Leeds Rhinos? And of course I got up and I said, well, let's have an arts policy. Let's use artists to kind of celebrate rugby league and Leeds Rhinos. And he said, that's a very good idea. So out of that, there was a little committee formed called Leeds Rugby Arts at Headingley Stadium, mostly for the Rhinos. And so we developed a policy, and we got a grant from the Arts Council and had an artist in residence for a year, which was fantastic. We got Carl Davis to compose an anthem for the Rhinos, and out of that music was used by Phoenix Dance to do a dance called Dancing with Rhinos, which appeared all over the place, using community dances. So that's how really then it took over. And when I was coming up to retirement, I thought, what can I do? I want to keep up this association of sports and arts. So I went to see my friend Jonathan and said, why don't we have a conference, on arts and sport? And we did, and we called it Fields of Vision. And that was in 2012. We also did some events, we used some art events around that. And from that, Fields of Vision developed. So we all got busy from the conference, writing papers and so on. And then we had an exhibition of Mandy Long, who's here. So where's Mandy? Has a wonderful sculpture she does on sport, which went down very well. And we were also asked then in 2015 if we would also do a conference at the Magic Weekend, which is at Newcastle, of the weekend of the sporting weekend of Rugby League, where they all played together, because they were very interested from the work I'd done, with the Rhinos. So we had a conference there, and also the book came out of it from what we'd done, and then we've continued with another. We had another event, and we continued through the good aspects of Carnegie at Leeds, which is the sports faculty, which my friend Jonathan belongs to. He got very interested with me, and we got supported by the faculty, and the latest thing was this Arts and Humanities Research Council to create a manifesto to help. We had 3 meetings, one in Bristol, one in Leeds and one in Manchester, on art and sport throughout the country, and that initiative is now coming to an end, and the manifesto, we hope, is the product from that. So that's how it all happened.
Good. I'll ask you about the manifesto a little bit later. John, from the practical perspective, you're somebody who facilitates artists and encourages them and puts them together. What's the point of this, of this initiative? What are the benefits to be had from it?
I'm not going to say I don't know, but I suppose partly there's kind of such a rich history of artists having worked with sport, and particularly for me, and understanding that, and I think I'm thinking of quite a few off the top of my head. I was listening to you, but I was checking my phone as well to see if I could remember the correct names of people. But it's such as David Shrigley, who's done the piece for Partick Thistle. He's done the mascot for Partick Thistle. You've got Virgil Tracy, who back in the 90s was did a piece for Tottenham, where it was There's Only One Virgil Tracy, which got the fans to sing. Leeds United, who did the Henry Moore piece, that was a sung piece that went out of Leeds City Art Gallery back in the 90s as well. So and that's just my football. The sculptures outside many football grounds where you've got artists being commissioned to actually do these pieces of work. And I think sometimes those are the pieces that get forgotten. You get forgotten. There is an ongoing kind of relationship going on, and I don't think people sort of bring it together enough in a way. And I think that's what's quite interesting, and that this initiative can help that and kind of put a context around it, and put a context around the artists and how they have that relationship. Mine is particularly football and that side, so that's how I think it can help, and perhaps formalise that in a little more tangibly.
I can understand how you could commission artists to respond to sport, but is it important to try and bring the sporting bodies in as equal partners or as participants in some way? And is there an interest from that side?
I think so. At the moment, we're just on the edges of building a relationship with Leeds United. Now, it's not directly with Leeds United. That is a longer process, and the way we're going into it is through Lust and Leeds United Supporters Trust, and on the back of some of a programme we're calling City Less Grey, we're looking to commission some street art pieces, basically, that will create a much more historical context of the club outside of the ground. So we're looking on Willowfell Road, particularly on the underpass there, but in the idea that I can't remember what celebration is it this year for Leeds. I'm a York City fan. I've got other things to worry about, like relegation out of the conference. So.
Well, yes, it's not 1919, so
yes.
My maths isn't very good, but 90.
Yeah, 100 years.
100.
100, there we go. And so, and I think it's part of that, trying to build that relationship in the 2019 celebration centenary year with Leeds United. So and whether that will be possible, I don't know. And so to commission, if we can look at commissioning more public-facing artworks that is both in participation with the fans, and whether that be through a dialogue with the fans, whether that be through voting, suggesting pieces and how pieces that might be celebrated in a walk through the city up to the ground, because that is part of the celebrated route, walking from the city centre out to the ground. So
I was up here quite a bit in 2014 for the start of the Tour de France, and the enthusiasm everywhere that the race went in those 3 days was fantastic. And people, obviously, it was very clear that people wanted to contribute to it in some way. They wanted, I mean, the tour is a very special thing, but it was an opportunity for people to sort of take ownership of it and just do something to be part of it. Did that work on the level of art as well? Did people, did you get things going at that time?
we did. And I think that was one of the sides of it, and it was quite independent. I mean, there was some bit of funding around through Leeds City Council, so there was a bit of support to actually make these things happen. And we did something called Juliana's Bike, which was it was a single-room hostel on a bicycle. Didn't quite function as well as it should have, because it weighed a ton, but it actually moved, so we did have Juliana's Bike. And we did do a celebration along the route as well, on Regent Street when it went past, so we did an exhibition there. And I think, and it's also seeing that, I mean, I was talking with my hairdresser this morning about coming and speaking here, and at 8 o'clock in the morning, and he was a bit stunned by this, I think. But I was talking about art and sport, and he was kind of, well, it's interesting because anyone could be creative, and in the same way that almost anyone can have a go at sport. And I think that's in people trying to get out at times, and it's allowing people to do that. And I think celebrations of this kind, Tour de France, and the creative side of it as well, I think people want to have a go. They want to have a go. Look at all the bikes that were decorated, and there is a fantastic one that cycles around Chapeltown where I live. There's a guy with a three-wheeler bicycle, not a trike, 3 wheels, 2 and 1, 3 in a row, which is quite bizarre, with flags, and he has all these things off it. And this is him just really just celebrating and being creative with bicycles.
Anthony, I've spent my career writing about sport and the arts and trying very hard to keep the two things as far apart as I possibly could, in order not to confuse myself, really. But you have very successfully conjoined the two things. Can you explain how that works in your head, what you're doing with two quite different disciplines, and you can't, does 1 and 1 make 3 basically when you do that?
Sometimes, but it's a bit like you. It sounds like you have a secret life. I mean, I have known you for a long time. We have met at various parts of the world, covering things like World Cups and Olympics. It's a really hard job that we do, and someone's got to do it. And we often meet. I mean, I've always been a big fan of your music writing, but I know that was not exactly a secret, but you did keep it separate. And to some extent, I've had a secret life in that, by day I've been, reporting on the latest in a long line of attempts to get Arsene Wenger out of Arsenal. It's a bit like, I was going to say the Queen Mother, but she's dead now, but the Queen Mother and Arsene Wenger, he'll always be with us. But in those moments when we've had our discussions over the years, I think what I found myself doing when I was covering these events, it's a bit strange this, but I sometimes took my guitar I remember taking it to Germany for the 2006 World Cup, and I was writing songs for the play Promised Land, which was put on at the Carriage Works in Leeds, and things like that. So I think it goes back to, just to give a sort of little anecdote about when I first saw the connection. I grew up in Leeds. I know by my accent it sounds as if I didn't, but I did. I always used to say I had my sort of Billy Bremner mates and my Billy Liar mates. And, you know, my Billy Bremner mates, you know, all mad and keen about Leeds United and about football, about sport, but there was also, I was a huge fan of the writer Keith Waterhouse from Leeds, and particularly his book, and of course the film and play in many incarnations, Billy Liar. And I saw it was a very Leeds, still do, it was a very Leeds book. And for those of us, you know, who have seen the latest Choke by Leeds United, we know that we get on the train, we're just about to get to the Promised Land, and then Billy Fisher gets off the train to get some milk. He doesn't get back on it, even though Julie Christie's on the train. Can't believe it. Why would you not get on a train with Julie Christie and go to London and marry her, as she actually offered? It sounds like I'm digressing, but I see that as a metaphor. And I see it as a metaphor for the psychology of Leeds, and of not just Leeds, obviously, but of, if you want to put it in a very grand way, the post-war northern working class. Now, when I was at university, I was at Sussex University, and I started to go out with someone who was, I joined the Drama Society, and you know, I just thought I'm getting as far away from my, you know, roots as possible. And someone else in the Drama Society, Kate, we started to court, as it were, and things weren't going that well. But one day she sort of looked at the books that I was reading. I think I had Savile on me, the novel Savile, and she said, "I didn't know you were into my dad's stuff." And I sort of thought, you know, I looked at the author of Savile, David Storey, and I thought, yeah, Kate Storey. You're his daughter. So I was actually going to break up with her that night, but we carried on going out for about 6 months more, and it gave me the opportunity to meet the great man himself, who very, very sadly passed away the other week. Now, why is it important about David Storey? Because she told me a great story about David Storey, which was when he was a young man, you know, he's from a mining family in Wakefield, and you know, went to grammar school, and then he went to the Slade School of Art in London, and he would go every week. He would actually go to the Slade School of Art. He'd get that train that Billy Fisher never caught, but he would actually go to London, and by the week he was an artist, and he was at the very prestigious school in London with all his very middle class southern, not necessarily friends, but he felt an outsider. And at the weekend he played for Leeds Rugby, or Leeds Rhinos as they're now called. He was, you know, a rugby league player, and very well known. When I told my dad I was going out with, you know, David Storey's daughter, he said, "Oh, that's fantastic, you know, you're going out with that rugby league player's daughter." He didn't know David Storey's writings, like This Sporting Life, or he knew the book, he knew the novel, but didn't make the connection. So I thought, and I read about that David Storey felt very conflicted between his double life, which was to play for Leeds RL, as they were then known, and he was seen as an outsider then, but then at the weekend to, you know, literally be an artist. And it was that conflict that I think produced This Sporting Life. He actually wrote it on the train journey from Leeds to King's Cross, and although the rugby league player in that novel isn't, you know, an artist by the weekend, he's torn. There is this kind of almost contradiction within him, within David Storey. She told me a lot of stories about him, you know, feeling that he had to get, you know, work from 9 till 5 and do his shifts just like his dad would have done down the mine. And he got up in the middle of the night and started scrubbing the floor because, you know, he wanted to have a contact with manual labour. Now, I know those days are gone. I know that's going back a long time, but I was kind of, ever since then, I was kind of inspired by that. And I think that's what, through Promised Land, I was writing about that, I was writing about Billy Lyer, and I was writing about, you mentioned Leeds United, and if you look around Ellen Road, and these are very unlikely links, and people, in fact, not only do not associate Leeds with what I'm about to say, they think that Leeds is the very opposite. Leeds United is the very opposite of art and culture, and it's the damned United and it's dirty Leeds. And we might have a discussion about this because I know where you stand on this, Richard. I'm very good friends with David Peace, and he did write a magnificent novel. This is a work of art out of 44 days of a conflict between Brian Clough and Don Revie's team. There's a lot more than that, I know, but...
You do know there are 3 statues to Brian Clough in England, and none of them is in Leeds.
Yes, indeed. And I was there at the time, and I met Cloughie, and I won't do a Brian Clough impersonation, but maybe later. But what I thought around Ellen Road was, and this is something that's hardly ever remarked on. You just go up the hill, Beeston Hill, you go to Beeston Cemetery, Tony Harrison's parents and grandparents are buried there, and it's the scene of, in my opinion, one of the great poems of post-war Britain, V. And he's being celebrated for his 80th birthday, almost as we speak. I think it's this week. Tony Harrison. His dad would read Leeds United programmes on one end of the couch, not sofa. At the other end of the couch, Tony Harrison would be reading his, philosophy books that inspired the poem Bookends. Where his mum saw them as bookends. Like his dad on one side of the couch reading Leeds United programmes, him on the other reading philosophy books. And he said, what's come between us? Books, books, books. And I think that division, that conflict, is again a metaphor for this division between sport and art. So, just to finish very quickly, not only Tony Harrison, but if you go down the road, you go to Middleton, Keith Waterhouse, that's where he was born. Peter O'Toole lived round the corner. Willis Hall, and then you go out to Wakefield, David Storey. What you're getting is a part of the country that inspired some of the great novels of the 1950s and 1960s, working class novels, from the north. You don't get a lot of those these days. And I'm not saying that they're all about sport or even that the writers were all into sport, but a lot of them covered sport. This Sporting Life, the clue obviously in the title, is a fantastic novel. And it's about a rugby league player, and it inspired a great film. That I know this is a terrible thing. I'm not going to say that Nottingham is in the north or whatever. It's the Midlands, but it's north of London, okay. And so there you've got the loneliness of the long distance writer, and you've got the great short story that's by Alan Sillertoe from Nottingham, and you've also got The Match, which he wrote, which is a magnificent short story within that collection. And I was reading a lot of these books when I was growing up, and I was very inspired by them. And suddenly I thought, why do I have my Billy Bremner mates, my Billy Lyer mates? Why is it so separate? Why have we got this separation? And I just think that it's a false dichotomy. I mean, the great work that Doug and Jonathan are doing, and that people like Gary Hetherington, who's got this great vision and is so up for it. I mean, I'll just end on this. Gary Hetherington is so amazing that he was very supportive of the Eddie Waring play. But then, I think it was his suggestion that in the next play, which was called Leeds Lads, about the First World War, that I thought to go to, I don't know, Pep Guardiola or someone and sort of ask, can we have one of your players for a few months to be in a play? So Leeds Rhinos are very visionary, very forward-thinking. They don't recognise this false dichotomy between sport and art. I don't recognise it. I know you don't. And that's a very long way of answering whatever the question was.
It's possible if you went to Jose Mourinho, he might let you have Wayne Rooney for a few months. Sorry.
Could I give an example when you said how do the sports clubs react to it in terms of the work that we did with Leeds Rhino? The manager of the Rugby Foundation, which is the charity aspect of it, and Jason Minsky, the artist, it was through the Rugby Foundation that we got the grant and employed him. Chris Roston, who was the manager, he's now working for the Leeds Rugby League organisation itself, said what happened, and he was on a selection board, and there were a number of artists who would do portraits and photographs and drawings, but there were also some of these funny conceptual artists, and Jason Minsky was one of them. And Chris Roston said, I don't know much about art, he says, but I think that what this guy's doing is really interesting. You know, he could bring something new. It's completely different. It's off the wall. I like him. So we selected him. And what Chris said after the year's residency, he said, you know, what happened with having that artist looking at what we were doing at the club made us look at what we're doing in a different way. And was very, very, very good. It was good because it brought young people and other people into some of the projects. Like Sharon's what's just come in, the director of Phoenix Dance, who did Dancing with Rhinos. And there's a lovely piece in the evaluation of the iMove Cultural Olympic Programme for Leeds, which Dancing with Rhinos gained 2 part, from a mother of a young Leeds Rhinos fan who had a glandular problem, who was overweight. She was very shy and wouldn't mix with people, but she loved the Rhinos. And she joined the dancing team to do Dancing with Rhinos, and her mother said it totally changed her. You know, it was a wonderful thing to do. She not only did she watch rugby passively, she was aware of physicality and movement, and she became much more confident in things. And another little story which is interesting is that Jason Minsky, the artist, got very friendly with the groundsman, and they would meet for a pint, you know, every now and then, and they were talking about art and everything, and they were sitting one evening in the stadium when everyone had gone, and the groundsman said to Jason, says, you know, I think I'm an artist. You know, see my pitch glowing, you know, and the stillness about it. Yeah, I'm an artist, aren't I? And Jason said, yes. He said, what we'll do is we've got to hire a helicopter, take a photograph, and you can sign it in the corner like an artist. But it really, you know, the rugby people really, really welcomed it. You know, welcomed this way and brought the fans together in a new kind of way around their fanship. It became expressive, it became emotional, it became social. You know, it was a way of doing that.
Can I ask you about the manifesto, Dan? If you could just, I mean, people got copies of it, I think, on their tables. But if you could summarise it and say, well, just summarise its aspirations and say what you would like to see come as a result of it.
Right. Well, I think the first thing I think we want the manifesto to do is to tell people and organisations, whether they're sport or arts, that art and sport aren't separate entities, that they do actually have things in common in terms of, you know, I mean, Phoenix Dance, physicality and expressiveness, that the art can bring something to sport, and sport can inspire artists, and not just to celebrate it, but even to critique sport, which some artists have done. So I think that's the first thing we want to do with it. Secondly, we want to encourage sporting organisations and artists to work together, and particularly sporting organisations, to understand, you know, art and sport can go together, and there will be benefits, you know, for your organisation and for artists. I mean, I think a lot of artists, it's quite surprising how in the history of art many artists have taken sport as an inspiration. And a few years ago, about 8 years ago, there was a big exhibition in Cork Street Gallery on football and sport, which was absolutely packed every day, and had some really well-known artists, because they were interested in sport as a culture, as a personal thing, and they wanted to express that interest. So we hope that we can persuade people or get them to see the benefits of art and sport, and its benefits in terms of health, and benefits in terms of celebrating culture and so on, and that people will say, hey, this is a good idea. Yes, I want to support. I want to see more of this. You know, I want my sporting organisation to express and celebrate itself through the arts, or arts people saying, that's the Tour de France, which did have a cultural programme, which was hugely successful, and people in distant villages were doing these weird works of art, you know, in order to celebrate a sporting event and see how the two could go together. So we want the manifesto to be a genuine declaration of our enthusiasm for the arts and enthusiasm for the sport, and for encouraging organisations and individuals to recognise what coming together can do, and not just to see them as totally different entities. They are part of cultural activity, they are part of expression of human values, they are part of, if you like, telling us what life is about.
I'm going to ask people if they have questions in a moment, but John, I just have one more question for you. when there's something like the Grand Départ of the Tour de France, or there's a cultural Olympiad to do, tied in with the Olympic Games or the European Championships or something, that's a sort of easy hook in a way, isn't it, to hang things around. You can provoke interest based on those things. But is the real task to try and ensure that programs are running the whole time and are not just dependent on big events like that?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. And as I've been listening to this, and lots of things are coming out about different programs that we're involved in and have been part of, and I think that for us has been really important over the last year or so, where we've been the exports program we've been part of.
That's with the French.
It's with Entorse in Lille and Bruit in Ghent.
Could you tell us what that is?
I can, yeah, and that was basically it was a program part of Creative Europe that we've just come to the end of a 3-year program with that, and it's an exchange of artists that the program itself was led by Entorse, and it's sport and art, and Entorse themselves in Lille in the Nord, I don't know the exact name of the region around Lille, they run a biannual sport and art festival, so they commission artists that have a relationship with sport, and that's really quite cross-cutting across all sports and art. So it can go from sailing to cycling to football to I'm trying to think of other ones that have been involved in that theme. For us, this festival was an exchange of artists between the cities. So it's very much about exchange. The whole Creative Europe programme is about artists moving around and us joining and having more cooperation between us. And so for us, in many ways, honestly, it's quite difficult at times. We had a different philosophy about how we commission artists and how we work with artists. We were very interested in artists coming and experimenting and discovering, whereas I feel the European way within that was the more moving artist productions around, and so it being performed in a different place, whatever that performance was, so it's a more finite piece. But for us, it was important that it was artists coming to Leeds and discovering what was Leeds about. And the first artist for us to come here was 2 artists, Jem and Mary, who are from Lille and Belgium, a couple, and they came and stayed at the art hostel in Leeds, and they spent 6 weeks in Leeds looking, and Jem, massive football fan, toured around going visiting different games, instant Leeds United supporter, and produced, and he's a street artist, graffiti artist, street artist, and he ended up producing the Marching On Together, which is up by the Playhouse. So that was his piece that he produced in Leeds, and he's also done next to the art hostel United We Stand. So these are works that work on different levels. There's the kind of political kind of side to them, which is always interesting, and the lead songs that come out, there's an alternative political reading you can take into these sayings rather than just it being about Leeds United. There's the other side of it, which is what we liked, and Jem picked up on immediately and took them out as very, very nuanced in his way to be able to pick these out. So that was one of the pieces, and then we had artists going off to Lille who were doing bike workshops. We have and our other main commission was a piece which was Neville Gaby and another artist whose name slips my mind at this moment in time, and he worked with a ladies football team in Ghent, and so he produced the ladies of Ghent. Oh, and then the stickers have just dropped out. So it's based on the old, it still goes, the Panini football sticker idea, and he worked with them and it was a different way of being able to engage with often a gender stereotyped sport, but actually be able for the ladies to have a different way of looking about what they were doing at the club. So it crosses right across the club in terms of who's involved in it, volunteers. And this is for sale for a very reasonable £10, which will go to the ladies of Ghent football team. And so they produced that over there in Ghent, and that was really interesting. It was launched at a football ground at one of their games. And that's, I think, where art and sport can kind of have a different relationship. It's a way that they were able to actually look at themselves in a different way.
If I could just say one thing as well, you mentioned about whether art comes to you or you take it out. I mean, Jonathan was very kind to say about the Eddie Waring play, Playing the Joker, which actually examined things like identity, belonging, community, but it was also through the lens of the Eddie Waring story, and had everything like music, etc. in it, and was funny and sad and all that. It went around about 15 rugby league clubs, and it played in, everywhere, from Hull throughout, Featherstone Rovers, Wakefield, Trinity, etc., including Headingley. And a lot of people came to see it, and I mean, afterwards they said to me, really enjoyed it, and they said they'd never been to see a play before or something like that. The same with when Promised Land was on at Carriage Works. They had something like 60% of people had never been to Carriage Works before, and two young women who got involved. We auditioned. There was like 30 in the cast. They came along thinking we were actually asking for Leeds United fans to do something about Leeds United. They didn't know it was about a play. They ended up getting roles in. They'd never, not only not been in a play before, they also said they'd never seen a play, and they ended up being in it. So I think there's another agenda going on, and to me, make a very broad generalisation, terrible thing to do, but okay, let's just say the arts perceived to be very middle class, sport, particularly rugby league, without a doubt rugby league, and football working class. I know it's very, very simplistic, but I think what the issue to me is very much about what I was saying before. We had a lot of working class novelists, we had a lot of working class in the 60s and 70s. Writers and artists and musicians. It was almost like compulsory at times, and we've seemed to have gone the other way. And I think an exclusion of that section of society from the arts or what's perceived to be culture is one of the things which does have a bit of a political edge at the moment. And I think one of the ways of helping to end that exclusion and to bring more inclusion. And people talk about diversity, and it's very important to talk about the lack of ethnic representation and gender representation, but people always seem to forget, what about the workers, what about working class representation, where's that going? And I think through involvement, these two different things, sport and art, you help to at least address it. I don't say you rectify it, you begin to address that.
It was, and just reminds me of the point which was every day and big events, which was one of the works that went as part of exports and was exported back was Invisible Flock, who went off to Lille, and they recorded, and I think this is important for me in football, is the fans' point of view. I love the stadium as an arena, whatever it is, and the whole spectacle of the fans. You can almost leave the football sometimes, and the fans can crack on. Which they produced a piece, 105 decibels, which was is the noise. Let me get this right. Let's see if I can get it right. Which is the how loud a single voice has to get before it can be heard in a crowd. I think 105 decibels above the crowd noise of the crowd, and so they recorded at the Lille's ground, and they recorded, I think they had 36 microphones around the pitch, but what they do is point it outwards, so it's the crowd that they're recording, and then they played it back in the centre of Lille, in their main square outside the art gallery, as 36 speakers back into the square. And it was an incredible piece singularly to listen to on headphones, because you have a whole crowd scrunched into two ears, and that's not physically possible at a game. You don't get that noise, but here you have the whole crowd at once. And what was quite interesting was that they brought that back. They've done it as part of Hull City of Culture, and they've recorded a game at the KC Stadium, and then they played it back in the city centre in Hull. And it coincided with a game it was an FA Cup game that was actually boycotted by the fans, and it coincided with that, where they played it back in the city centre in Hull. And it was, I think it seemed to coincide with the launch week of City of Culture. And so there's this kind of, the fans listened to a game in the city centre while the game went on up out at the ground where it was being boycotted. And there was an interesting thing going on. The interesting thing was that they tested that piece in Leeds, in Millennium Square, and were asked to turn it down by Leeds City Council, who had commissioned it, which was an interesting kind of contradiction as we go towards capital of culture bid. That there's, I think, in these sort of spectacles of arenas, there's some way to go sometimes in terms of public projection of works. Yeah. But it's that idea of the fans, and that celebration of the fans is really interesting. And that other side of sport it's the fans who kind of make it.
Good. Now, please, who has questions for any of these three erudite and informative people? Yes.
I have an observation which I hope will help me formulate a question, or just a comment really. I was really interested in what you said about the Billy Liar and the Billy Bremner scenario. I mean, I'm an Everton season ticket holder, so I'm very strongly steeped in football tradition, but I've also worked in museums and galleries for 35 years. And my friends think I've got a little bit of a split personality. There is a me that goes to the match and enjoys football and engages in the crowd, becomes part of the crowd identity. There's also me that kind of appreciates and has worked in a cultural environment for many years. So the other week we were walking past, there is a point to this, so I'll ask you a question in a moment. We were walking past this wonderful statue of Dixie Dean outside Everton's ground, which is an action shot where he's leaning forward, and it's actually so much more than that. And I said to the guys, we were just having some banter about it. They were saying, "Oh, you work in a museum, you're dull, you're not interested in all that." I said, "Stop for a minute." We were right outside the Dixie Dean statue, and I said, "Tell me what you see in front of you." And he said, "Well, it's a statue of Dixie Dean." I said, "Yeah, but tell me what Dixie Dean means to you." And look at the statue, and they looked at this wonderful athlete, all these muscles, and at the peak of his physical prowess and prime. And then it kicked in a whole set of reminiscence, and this is the core of my question. Can I ask the panel what they think about that relationship between the tangible and the intangible heritage? In other words, the ability for an object or a work of art to then inspire a set of emotions or reminiscences about something or someone. They went away from that, not having seen a statue of Dixie Dean, but saying, "Oh, in those days, didn't Dixie Dean used to travel to the match on a tram with the football fans?" And so straight away it set up a whole set of intangible reminiscences and memories, which I don't know, if one of them had committed it to paper, it would have been a piece of an artwork, if you see what I mean. But they just went away talking about it. There was that capacity of an object to stimulate some kind of emotional response. So I suppose my question is, what do the panel think about that relationship between tangible and intangible culture and art and sport?
Yeah, Tom. Yeah, one of the things that Jason Minsky did, who was the artist in resident, he developed an event called Show and Share, and he simply put an advert out through the normal means, the Leeds Rhinos website and so on, and said, come along on the night of so-and-so to the stadium, come to such and such a room, have a cup of tea and a biscuit, and bring something. Bring something that's important to you and important to you as a fan of Rugby Leeds. So, you know, it was fantastic. People brought all kinds of things, and memorabilia, I can't pronounce it, but things that had an association with them going to rugby, things that you wouldn't expect, and he photographed and filmed and documented it, and it was brilliant. And again, it was people bringing things, objects, bits of objects or whatever, to them had a special meaning, a meaning of their own history and their own involvement with sport and so on, and it worked really well. And I agree with you, and art can do that. And Mandy was here. Mandy's still there. Mandy's a great artist, and she does this work of sports people in motion. They're kind of suspended in motion. And we had an exhibition of her work at the town hall basement, and people came and we said, "My goodness, just look at that. That's what I like about." You know, I like scoring tries. Look at that movement. Look at that poise. Look at that physicality. And they began to see it slightly differently. It wasn't just who's winning. It was, you know, aspects of the game. You know, the movement and the physicality and people, you know, making patterns with each other and patterns with space. And art can do that. Art can kind of set people up thinking. People will say, "Oh, do you remember when so-and-so scored try? He looked just like that." You know, and you've got it in mid-air, you know, full of expression, you know, and I think that's, you know, really good.
Well, that's a really, really good question, actually. I hadn't thought of it like that. And immediately, I think, because you did mention, again, Billy Bremner, you know, as an Everton fan, you're trying to forget the fact that the Battle of Goodison from when that was 1965, that Battle of Goodison. You still can't. Anyway, no, there's a statue of Billy Bremner outside Elland Road, which has become, you know, a symbol for Leeds United fans, and it is a very relatively recent statue. So, again, you know, people meet there, and they reminisce there. But I like to bring another example of the football stadium, for example, you know, which are fantastic works of art or architecture. They evoke such a lot. But I'll give just a very short sort of story about. I teach kids from Barnsley who went to the school where Kes was filmed, and Kes itself, you know, talk about bringing art and sport together. There's probably one of the most famous football scenes in film history. Brian Glover, the PE teacher, who's like, you know, Dennis Law, Bobby Charlton, and George Best all rolled into one, etc. Well, I think we all know that. It's become an iconic moment. But I took these kids who I was teaching during the week, who were mad about football, but the aim was to get them writing, and by the end of the week become writers. We went to the Arvon Creative Writing Centre, Hebden Bridge, just up the road from that, and so many things were going on there. But to bring in your point, I think at the beginning of the week, just to, we asked who do you support, and they're all wearing like Chelsea tops, Manchester City tops, that kind of thing, right? On the Thursday, we took them to Oakwell, and we went on a tour of the stadium, and we met Norman Rimington, who sadly passed away, also with Mr. Barnsley, and but it was just the stadium. The stories about things in the stadium, in an empty stadium, were so evocative for them as kids that so many they started to write about it, and they started to reimagine the things that had happened in the stadium. They talked to their parents, their grandparents. But by the end of the week, they got out their Barnsley tops, which a lot of them were brought with, and they were proudly wearing Barnsley tops. Now, I mean, what does that tell them? I mean, in the end, they were showing their pride in the local community, and what does Barnsley Oakwell Stadium mean to them? But at the beginning of the week, they were sort of supporting whichever mega brand Metropolitan Football Club happened to be trendy that particular week. And so I think going to Oakwell Stadium when it was empty and having a tour of the ground, brought, as you were saying, something quite intangible in a way. We got them writing doing haikus, doing all sorts of things, you know, and at the end of the week they were writing about themselves, their lives, you know, their parents, not just football, but I definitely think that visit to the stadium was kind of what you were saying, not just the statue, but the stadium itself brought out these tangible and intangible sort of imaginative leaps for them, very sort of stimulating.
Yeah, I think mine continues on the football grounds, and it's and there was, and I think it's that. For me, it's memories, and and this is quite personal for me because there is a time when York City won't be playing at Bootham Crescent anymore. The ground has to go. We have to go from there. And that's quite. I mean, it's difficult. Sometimes if you're not a football fan, it's quite hard to explain this fact about a ground and what that ground means to you, and the emotions attached to that ground. And I think I'm preparing for that. But it brings to mind two other things again with the grounds and the places. It's the one, the Neville Gaby, which drew us to him. He did an archaeological dig in the Goldmouth at Bradford Park Avenue's ground, which was really interesting, and to see the really boring stuff he dug up. But one of the things he dug up was coins. Now the nice view is, it was when they took the blanket round and they were throwing coins in. The other, probably more realistic view, it was the coins being thrown at the goalkeeper as he's in goal. So this it's really interesting. So that kind of place, that Bradford Park, is still there. The stadium, the ground, and bits of terracing are still there. And they found the goalpost and where that would have been. It's very strange. But for Middlesbrough, when they left Ayresome Park, I don't know who actually commissioned it, whether it was probably the property developers when they moved in and built the housing estate on the old Ayresome Park. They reinstalled the centre spot, so the centre spot is there with a football on it, a bronze football in the centre spot, and some corner flags, bronze corner flags. So it's actually marked out within the housing estate. So those people, the fans, the older fans, can go back and visit and know where and orientate themselves back into where they've been perhaps going for 20, 30, 40 years. So for me, that's where it's where art and that kind of the tangible and the intangible of memories and place are associated. Yeah.
The question is, sorry if it has already been made by other people because I arrived late, but one of the ideas behind the manifesto was also the fact that the group behind it recognized that we are at a time of cuts in local authority funding, services and so on. And I think the idea of this coming together, encouraging this coming together, is because we are in a very delicate political moment where there are, in the different organizations like Sport England, Heritage Lottery Fund, Arts Council England, there are people who want art and sport to collaborate and who recognize the potential for collaboration. But there is also the possibility, temptation of actually arguing a separate case for the arts or for sport, almost to the detriment of the other, if you like. So, for example, one of the seminars highlighted the fact that the evidence about the physical well-being, mental well-being benefits is much stronger in the case of sport than in the case of the arts, and that the Treasury, when they decide how to invest, what to invest, they actually tend to privilege to sport activities as opposed to arts activities. So, although it is also true that the evidence for the positive impact of arts activities is improving. So, I think we believe that we need to intervene in this discussion and highlight more the examples of more kind of creative, imaginative policy practice, recognizing the benefits of a sort of hybrid synthesis rather than everybody arguing their separate corner, which is a risk. You know, what is beginning to happen also in relation to parks, libraries, museums, because all the different areas are being cut, and it could get even worse after the elections in June.
Anybody want to respond?
No, I think Franco was one of the member of the steering group who brought the manifest together. Yeah, that's a point that is contained within that. There are, kind of policy implications, of the manifesto in terms of the way that arts and sports get their funding, what they can do through collaboration and so on. So yeah, I think that's good to remind us, Franco.
Any others? There was another hand. Yes, in the corner.
Sorry, I was late as well. I was slightly earlier than you. Thank you for telling me about David Malcolm's story. I did my BA and PhD at Slade. Know nothing about him for some reason. We know all about Anthony Gordon. We know all about Lucian Freud. Haven't heard about him. But what I wanted to say was that this idea of art or arts and sport, I think is quite interesting, and I think maybe a lot of the problems stem from the fact that we have such deeply held notions about what they should or shouldn't be. I mean, for me, there's a lot of crossovers, and very deep crossovers. Think about rhythm, think about how you see time when you're experiencing sport and when you're experiencing art. Think about endurance. There's a huge tradition in fine art, performance art, which is all about endurance, durational performance, and so on. And I work on running as an artistic discourse, and someone I know is working on a PhD, which is to use theatre as a lens to look at parkrun, the parkrun phenomenon, so as to bring that back to theatre. So there's a lot of crossovers out there, and I think it is our job, and especially if we are from different disciplines, to really work together to pull those examples out, rather than to only say, oh, a sculpture is an art. There's a lot of art, there's a lot of creativity out there. There are expanded definitions of what sport or what creativity could be. But what I wanted to say also is, next is linked back to David's story. Are there examples of David's stories out there? I know he's passed away, but are there examples out there in the art world or in the sport world? In fine art, I know that I think some of us may have heard that Grayson Perry, Tour de France winner, he's a hardcore cyclist. He recently outed himself as a cyclist, and there's a lot of prejudice. The reason why I use the word outed is because there's a lot of prejudice in the art world towards anything that involves sweat. It has to be heroic. If you're sweating, it's not so heroic. You have to, but I won't go into that. So Grayson Perry cycling, and then there's of course Murakami running, the novelist. But there's also Chris O'Philly, Turner Prize winner. He's showing something. I just read this today, actually, or yesterday in the Guardian. He is into kayaking, and he's a Turner Prize winner. And Tracy Emin, love her or hate her, I personally dislike her, but she swims 1 mile 4 times a week. But then she has a 16-meter pool in her underground. in the underground level in the house in Shoreditch. So what I'm trying to say is that maybe it could be useful to have a kind of a mascot, I don't know what it's called, but kind of a figure, a very high-profile figure from the art world or from the sport world, who actually embrace these crossovers, and that would really help the public to have a kind of an imagination about the possibilities of sport and art. Thanks.
There was a moment in going back to 1992 when I thought that figure had appeared in Leeds, and I wonder if Richard, I think, knows who I'm talking about. And Howard Wilkinson, the manager of Leeds United at the time, was introducing this player and says, Eric Cantona, of course, he's a poet, and he's an artist and a philosopher, the ideal roommate for David Batty. Now, David Batty was the epitome of the opposite of that, and seemed to typify that kind of, aggressive, combative, very Yorkshire thing. And Howard Wilkinson, was supposedly a very down man. Funnily enough, I was interviewing Howard Wilkinson for my latest book, A Yorkshire Tragedy, available in all good bookshops. And Howard told me he'd been writing a novel, and I said, what was it? You know, he said, well, it's a bit like Kes. And yeah, there are a lot of people out there. I mean, sure, maybe I'll exaggerate by saying a lot. There are quite a few. The problem is, I mean, there are two things, because you've started off by, it was very interesting what you were saying, but there are these 2 points I want to make. The first point is, when we were writing about, I think neither of us do this anymore, write about football matches, but we talk about, the script, the drama. You couldn't write this if this was a film. I mean, Leicester City winning the Premier League title, you couldn't make it up. You couldn't, if it was in Hollywood, it would be seen as far-fetched. It would be very odd. But we're always writing, or a lot of football writers, sports writers, talk about drama, and that sort of the only thing with that is that at the end of Hamlet, he's going to. Sorry for the spoilers, but he's going to die. They're all going to die. But you don't really know what's coming at the end of the football match. I mean, there may be an injury time. Hamlet, Alex Ferguson was put him on, and he'd rise from the dead. But the second point is that who are these figures and what happens to them? A lot of people I've interviewed over the years in sport have an interest, but and you say he was outed, Grayson Perry. I mean, as someone who got involved in sweat, it works the other way. You have to out these people. And talking about outing, to give an example, Graham Lasseau, back in the day,
I was going to bring up Graham Lasseau as well.
He was someone who said, one, he went to art galleries, and two, he read The Guardian, and therefore he was, three, gay. This is what football crowds, therefore, used to...
his fellow professionals thought.
He must be gay because he goes to art galleries and he reads The Guardian. And there was terrible homophobic abuse from his fellow players like Robbie Fowler and the fans. And, so it's hard, and maybe it's still hard for sports people to admit to their artistic side. Eric Cantona kind of got away with it because he's like this eccentric, maverick kind of character. But
and French.
Do you think it's a British thing? Do you think it's a British thing? Because I was going to make the same point. I think it needs to come from the other side. I think it's the sports people who have to move and be mascots for the art in this country. And I feel like Eric Cantona, because he was French, I think there's less of an issue in Europe about being seen to like the finer things in life, let's say.
I think Eric was a bit of an outcast in France as well, actually. Problems there.
But I do wonder whether it is something about that you get a lot of French players would not be uncomfortable to be seen at fashion shows, art galleries, more events like that than we would in this country.
I think that Martin Creed in 2008, he had athletes. His artwork was athletes running through the Duveen Gallery in the Tate. So for over 4 months, an athlete, which wasn't just professional, athletes with capital A, but people who just ran, would run the 86-metre dash from one end of the gallery to the other every 30 seconds. And some of them were athletic clubs, but some were personalities and some were ordinary volunteers. And I think that was quite an interesting piece of work in the sense, what was he saying? Was he saying that, that sport might become self-referential like works of art? Was it a comment on commercialisation of both art and sport? Was it a statement about the physicality of making art? Or maybe it simply emphasised that both are very important visual and sensory experiences, and that indeed art and sport can have commonality. And I think that was quite an interesting piece of work instigated by an artist.
And also, I do think there is a British tradition of being sceptical of the arty-farty as I've been accused. I mean, I did a very short film for the BBC up north about Leeds, coming to Leeds, and it was kind of a poetic thing. I came in on a train and tried to make it a bit poetic. I know it sounds odd, but when Guy Mowbray was introducing it, those are the words he used. This is a bit arty-farty, and it was in the middle of highlights from Barnsley, Sheffield United, blah blah blah. So it seemed to jar with the tone of the programme, but a lot of people also sort of liked it. Thought, well, that's a bit different, and I mean, it's a very, very good point that you've made, but I think there is a lot of prejudice in Britain against it. So, to give an example about a form of art like literature, in America they're a lot more comfortable with novelists writing about, sport or using it as a metaphor for the great American dream. Philip Roth, Saul Bellow. There's so many examples of it. It's, that's what American writers do. In Britain, up until, I'd argue, David Peace and the Damned United, there really wasn't the equivalent thing, and perhaps even after the Damned United, we still haven't really got that in Britain. Sport doesn't seem to be a fitting subject for the great writers, like the great writers would write about it. Do you agree, Richard?
I do, yes. And it would be very nice to see more novelists taking that on. It is an American tradition. No American writer has ever needed to be ashamed of liking baseball or of weaving it into a novel. And we sort of do it in fits and starts, don't we? It would certainly be nice.
And Richard, you introduced me in your column, and I can't remember its title now, but you might remember it, an excellent book of short stories that came from France, I think, or maybe Copy's Angels.
Oh, wonderful book! Yeah,
wonderful book
yeah.
Of different writers writing about using sport as their subject. Brilliant, recommended to anyone. I think Jonathan's getting itchy. Saying it's about time. Shut up.
More questions? Any more questions? Yes.
I'd like to pick up on class again, I think, and going back to the tangible and intangible. And I've just got thinking about neoliberal, deindustrialising Britain, whatever we want to call it. What's interesting for me about football clubs, football grounds, rugby league clubs, they're perhaps the only thing that is still linked with a past that's not changing, that people have some ownership of, and that's theirs, if you like. And it doesn't surprise me. That's one thing that's probably fixed, the relationship's not, the work's certainly not. So I think what also interests me about football grounds is that, Gaston Bachelard's point about poetic spaces. And I think people collectively create art every Sunday afternoon, every Saturday afternoon. They dress up, they sing, they sway. So all that body movement. So I think that's going on, and that sort of collectivity has gone on. And I think a lot of that's based on memory. But I also think memory is something that's, it's life lived in the present as well, isn't it? So I think, I don't know, just an observation really about that.
One of the most powerful works of art and sport I'd seen was by an artist called Stephen Banks, and it was just a kind of very detailed, slightly surrealist type colours of an empty dressing room, and it was really powerful. There was a sense of the people who weren't there, the excitement and the preparation, or the anguish after losing, or whatever. It was just an empty space, but it was so powerful and evocative. It was brilliant.
I was just thinking, Ali Jepson died not long ago, but another great Hunslet and Leeds player, Frank Watson, died, and it kind of got overshadowed by the Jepson's death. And he died last year, and I did an interview with him a few years ago, and he talked to me about going back down Hunslet, sort of 30 years after he stopped playing. And he was watching the sort of thuggery and what was going on the pitch. And he kind of said the artistic aspect of the game seemed to have been lost, and it had been replaced by this hyper-masculinity. So perhaps, again, is sport a repository for, the one thing that's been lost in the workplace for a lot of people is still
Yeah, I agree with you. And in fact, you've just given me an idea, because I'm trying to think of like an idea for a new book. And thank you. It will be in the acknowledgements. It's almost like the secret life of art in sport, because it's always been there, and it's just never. But there's never been an opportunity for it to come out. When it comes out, the Graham Rousseau thing, it gets subject to abuse. That's really interesting, because. I think that the secret life of art in sport is, it's apparent to all of us who love both art and sport, and I think what you were saying about the stadium, for example, that connection with the community, it's a connection with the past and the present. It seems to me that, you talk about York City, you invest such a lot of emotion into it, and your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents have done that. And it's almost like unique, isn't it, in that being the centre of a community. So when you go to somewhere, in Hull, where, for example, you've got the local housing, you've got Hessel Road, I've mispronounced it if you're from Hull, it's Hessel Road, I know, but Hessel Road, and you've got the Boulevard Stadium, for example, which, was where Hull played. And then you had St Andrew's Docks, you had all those connections, and there have been great works of art and the whole City of Culture celebrating that at this very moment. But all three have gone, and it is to do with what you were saying at the beginning, deindustrialisation, neoliberalism, and almost like a political project. So there are so many of these connections, and through art, it's through art that people in Hull are sort of trying to keep on to these things. Hull FC, the Rugby League club, are using artists to make those connections, to remember the past. It's not about nostalgia, it's not about sentimentality. I know those are the accusations that are often made, but I think what we're losing when we close down a stadium, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, etc., etc. We're not just losing tradition. We're losing all those things that you're talking about, memories, a community's sort of investment in its local team, and art is a very good way of projecting that.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really think we need to wrap things up, Richard.
Sure.
So, I do apologise, because I know that that go on and on, but some of us have to go to other things. I would like to thank you all for coming here first off, and if you could take away a copy of the manifesto with you, let us have your reactions to it, and if you do know organisations that will be prepared to sign up to it, please put them in touch with us. So having thanked you, I'd also like to thank our panel, obviously, especially John, who had his haircut special. I mean, come on.
I want to know who his barber is.
There are plans to continue this. There will be a special issue of Sport and Society, and it's an academic journal. There will be another event in Hull later in the year. There's plans for an event in Leicester in the following spring, and hopefully there will be many other initiatives sparring out of this. So thank you very much, and thank you very much particularly obviously to our panel and to Richard.